On December 17, 2009, Denmark's Queen Margaret celebrated a much-anticipated climate summit with a gala dinner in Copenhagen's Christiansborg Palace. Leaders and distinguished guests from around the world enjoyed salt cod puree, scallops, dessert, and a musical performance by the Band of the Royal Lifeguards. If the Queen's lifeguards weren't enough to inadvertently underscore the theme of climate change, the event also included recordings of Frank Sinatra singing "Here's That Rainy Day" and of George Harrison performing "Here Comes the Sun." Queen Margaret managed to ignore diplomatic niceties that should have seated her next to the evening's longest-serving visiting dignitary, Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe, a man better known for brutalizing opponents, stoking racial violence, and gutting his country's economy than for his charming dinner conversation or commitment to reversing global warming. "We know that some people don't want to sit next to others," explained a Danish protocol officer to a reporter. "It's like a family dinner. You don't want Uncle Louis sitting next to Uncle Ernie." Queen Margaret's dodge gave the summit its first and only success. A week after the conference closed, Xinhua, China's state-run news agency, published a story alleging that Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao had learned during the dinner that U.S. President Barack Obama had invited friends and allies for a, quote, clandestine, unquote, meeting later that evening to discuss negotiating strategy, and that China's delegation had not been included. It remains unclear whether such a meeting was scheduled or if Wen got bad information. It's possible the entire story was concocted by the Chinese government to justify Wen's absence from a key meeting the next day and his delegation's refusal to agree on a final deal. Whatever the truth, Wen withdrew to his suite at the Radisson Blu Hotel, and the summit went nowhere. Much of what we think we know about the following day's closed-door negotiations comes from a secret recording. Two 1.2 gigabyte sound files, quote, created by accident, unquote, and obtained by the German news magazine Der Spiegel. On December 18th, 24 heads of state gathered in the Arne Jacobsen conference room in Copenhagen's Bella Center to hash out differences on a common approach to climate change. More than 100 other world leaders waited outside the room for the principals to produce an agreement. China's premier remained at the Radisson. Instead of bargaining with his fellow head of state, Wen Jiabao, the President of the United States found himself negotiating with He Yafei, a Chinese deputy foreign minister well known for his exceptional command of English and his willingness to use it to advance his country's worldview, with sometimes provocative arguments. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Nicolas Sarkozy pressed China and India to commit to binding targets on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. China and India announced that they could not support a document that imposed specific numerical targets, even on the Americans and Europeans. Norwegian Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg asked Indian officials how they could renounce the very plan they had proposed just a few hours earlier. President Mohammed Nasheed of the Maldives, an island chain that lies in the Indian Ocean about 7 feet above sea level, demanded that the Chinese delegation explain how it could ask his country to, quote, go extinct, unquote. Sarkozy accused the Chinese of, quote, hypocrisy, unquote. He Yafei lectured the group on environmental damage from the Industrial Revolution, several NGOs accused Western officials of blocking a deal, and a few journalists accused Obama of selling out Europe by letting China off the hook. Not to be ignored, Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez called Obama the devil. A gathering that then British Prime Minister Gordon Brown had hyped as, quote, the most important conference since the Second World War, unquote, ended in acrimony and conflicting accounts of what had happened and with no progress toward any meaningful agreement. But here's the key takeaway. The summit didn't collapse because China was snubbed, India is irresolute, the Europeans are stubborn, or Obama is lord of the underworld. It failed because A, there was not nearly enough common ground among the leading established and emerging players to reach a deal that would have required sacrifice from all sides, and B, no single country or bloc of countries had the clout to impose a solution. This argument perfectly illustrates the G0 and where it comes from. Rising powers like China, India, Brazil, and South Africa claim that 150 years of industrialization in the West have inflicted nearly all the damage that now has climate scientists in a panic. They insist that Americans and Europeans have no right to expect developing countries to sharply limit their growth to clean up the rich world's mess. They have a point.